and set dressing could make a good home for these items. Those are our preferred locations for dispersal. Otherwise, they will be sold, and if they can't be sold, then there may be a small fee incurred for our disposal of said items. Hopefully, we'll find happy homes for all the pieces. And we're looking to resolve to progress the ethical disposal of 14 items of furniture from the former Canterbury Heritage Museum site and collection, in line with the Museum Collection Development Policy, including the use of delegated authority, Delegation D14B, to the Head of Culture, Leisure and External Museum Director to authorise the disposals identified in this report.
Thank you very much. And I think you proposed that, so I'm more than happy to second it. Lovely. So that would be absolutely brilliant. So anyone got any comments on that? Please, be really helpful now. Thank you. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Alan. Having been shown around the collection housed in the old Adscene building in the Wincheve estate, I was struck by just how much junk there was, and it can only be described as junk. Most of it gifted by members of the public to the council. I think there's a need for a much more drastic pruning than this, and maybe eBay will be useful. But yes, I think this is a move in the right direction. There's a long way to go, I would suggest. Thank you.
Excepting we do have a really quite large collection of ornithology and Roman pots in our completely secret location, Michael. Then I'm sure this is something the museum's team might circle around to again. I accept that there were a lot of Victorian donations of moths and butterflies and stuffed birds, etc., which may not be future items we would consider.
It wasn't those sort of things I was talking about. It was things like old washing machines, old computers.
I don't know. We'll circle round to those in 40 years' time and find they are in fact incredibly valuable and rare. But don't worry, Michael, I'll be here to progress that then.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, I was actually quite struck by that, and also I will say comment. I mean, the report was absolutely awesome, wasn't it? It was really, really thorough, and I think for the first time ever, I do understand, you know, the diligence that goes through that, and you know, we have good accreditation in this museum. The team is brilliant at that, and I'm very proud of the way they've handled this, because I think, picking up slightly on Michael's point, you know, when and if we need to do some more, then they have my full backing to sort that through and do what we need to do. So very, very happy with that. Do you want to add some more to that?
I'll just mirror what you said, because I think it is important that the museum's team and the wider team are hugely aware of the ethical implications in both disposal and in storage. There's ethical implications to both of those things. What you store and don't show, what you dispose of and can never show again. And they're hugely diligent. I think they are an example of best practice in the sector. And this is an incredible report for 14 items that a lot of people might perhaps roll their eyes and say 40 pieces of junk. They're not. They were gifted to the museum with a very specific purpose from a family who cared greatly. One of them is a really interesting example of 17th century cabinetware. You know, there are some fascinating pieces here, and we could, you know, if we could have a half-an-hour discussion on each piece, but we're not going to. But the time that went into that report shows the ethical care that the team take with this disposal. So thank you for noting that, Alan. That's appreciated.
Echo that. It's certainly impressive piece of work, and it's helpful, definitely helpful.
In no way, Alan, were my comments meant to be a reflection on the staff. So I don't think they were taken that way, but yes, we have an outstanding staff. But it's interesting, in most of these big art galleries, something like 90% of the paintings and pictures are not on show. It's staggering, isn't it? So I expect probably more than 90% of our exhibits are not on show, probably 95%.
So we can all work with that. They've got our confidence to try that as well, haven't they? To swap some things around, so that'd be really good. So if we're happy with that, then of course we need to have a recorded vote on this particular item. So I'll hand over the microphone to Vanessa, who worked through the recorded vote for us, please. Thank you very much. And obviously, a vote for is to go ahead with that disposal. So.
I think you said it, Chair. We've had the proposal, and vote for is a vote for the proposal, unless you want me to reread the wording out again. No, lovely, thank you. That's carried unanimously, Chair.
Okay. So we're now doing item 11, remember, because this is the one we've put into the first part of our agenda tonight. So this is all about probably the most exciting part of our agenda, really. Well, I mean, Charlotte would probably disagree there, but the that's okay. But anyway, here we're going to go through the draft corporate plan. So let's start the ball rolling. So we're going to consider a report by Peter Davis, Director of Strategy Improvement, and Leah Whitlock, Head of Policy and Communications. And Peter's here tonight to help us through that. And we will spend a short while looking at this item in quite a lot of detail. So obviously, Tricia Marshall, Director of Corporate Services, Peter Davis, and Director of Strategy and Improvement. So I'm going to introduce this item in a moment or two. But I'm first of all going to ask Peter if he'd like to just introduce the report and clarify for all of us so that we can come and reinforce that if we need to about why we have a corporate plan, and then we start working through the corporate plan in a little bit more detail, highlighting a few things. You happy with that, Peter? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, and we've obviously brought this through to go out to consultation back in March. Broadly, the corporate plan, it's a requirement of the Constitution for us, and for most people in the real world, it'd be seen as sort of like the outward-facing business plan for the council. So sets the agenda for the next 4 years for the current administration. So we're required to review and agree a new corporate plan at least once per administration, and normally gets done towards the beginning. The corporate plan sets out the key priorities. A lot of those will reflect the administration's own ambitions and generally sort of manifesto commitments in the run-up to local elections. And these are worked through over a number of months between all councillors, some councillors and officers to go through. That's put into a draft document which is then sent out for consultation, and that has a minimum 12-week consultation period, which what we undertook this time. It's fair to say we consulted pretty widely on this one. We were encouraged, I think it is fair to say, by Cabinet to try and engage more people than usual in the corporate plan consultation. And we managed a very healthy 81, which is about 75 more than normal would respond to a corporate plan consultation. So I think the message was out there, at least with 75 more people and organisations. And all of those that came back were pretty long and detailed responses with helpful comments on how they felt, in particular, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals could be used as a basis for underpinning, not delivering, but underpinning the corporate plan and the ambitions and priorities that you as a Cabinet administration wanted to set. The general sort of think global, act local ethos was really, I think, what captured people. They got and understood the international and national level priorities and why they were important. And usefully, there are local groups that work on many of these individual things. And as Chris said earlier, some of that has been sort of pushed in from sort of different angles, and those emotions were a number of notice motions will be captured over a period of time through the delivery of the corporate plan once adopted. And definitely the sort of life below water UN SDG was one that really sort of picks up on some of the themes coming through from the notice motion on the seawater and seawater quality. The consultation I felt was relatively supportive all the way through. Yeah, I suppose the general, if there was a positive criticism, it was that it wasn't local enough in terms of some of the stuff that we were looking at. And again, I feel the way the supplement document, Appendix 2, has tried to sort of phrase some of that stuff and set the ambitions by which Cabinet want to progress those aims and make the SDGs relevant to a local audience, really do sort of now give something for people to understand what it's going to mean to them, whether they live in Whitstable, Herne Bay, Canterbury or the villages within the district, and can find something there which will hopefully benefit them over the course of the next 4 years of the corporate plan. Bits still to be delivered, obviously, and this came up quite strongly within the overview and scrutiny feedback, was around how you measure the performance of something like this. It is tricky, and again, I think in both the report and the document itself, we set out how we want to do two different things. One, measure locally, and we'll come back to how we do the sort of key performance metrics over the next few months, and that may be something you want to discuss tonight. But also there's how we report back on us chipping away, definitely not delivering, but chipping away at the ambitions of the UN SDGs. And there's commitments in there around us delivering a voluntary report back up to government and the UN itself to show how we've helped to progress from a very local level at Canterbury level, our contribution to delivering those very important SDGs. I'm happy to leave it there, and if there's more questions I can answer.
Yeah, thank you for that, Peter. Yeah, I will be grateful thanks to Alex and Chris, who I think probably spent a lot of hours actually what we call pulling this together, really. I think we had this, what we might call maybe an odd idea that we really would do something that helped us and now was very firmly into the position of actually, thinking global and acting local. And I did get that right this time. It's one of them mouth-turning things, isn't it? But and I believe that is the right thing for us to do. It matches all our ambitions, and it also, I think, for me, answers many of the criticisms levelled at councils of being too short-termist. And many times councils are criticised for that, which is looking to the next election, looking to the next popular thing. And I think we're courageous enough to actually know that we've got a big journey ahead, and we've got some big problems globally and some big problems locally. So let's deal with them in a sensible and mature way. So maybe I'll hand it over to Alex and Chris. You want to start off, Alex, and then Chris come back to comments on where you've got to.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank Peter and the team that worked on this as well, because I think it's a fabulous piece of work, and I think it was a bit of an open goal, really, particularly when you spoke to Chris and I first, as it felt to me, as Alan said, that this is the sort of thing that we should have that aspiration and ambition. And when I look around at councils that I perhaps look at enviously at what they're doing, this is the sort of big thinking that doesn't get done often enough. And that's not to say that we're, looking at the stars and tripping over the pavement, but because of course we will continue, as we always have done and the officers always will, to do the basics brilliantly, whilst also having a much broader and wider ambition. But I think what a lot of the comments from overview and scrutiny and some of the comments in the consultation, I think there's some fair criticism in there, and there's some really useful stuff. This isn't the be all and end all. This is a start. This is a framework that we want to work towards, and it's always useful to test what you do at the local level on a much grander scale. And it is important to understand that when we have a unique different set of challenges in this district. We have the seawater challenges, we have rural, we have all of these different areas, and there are very few areas of the sustainable development goals that don't touch on some part of the district, and it is extremely useful to understand what we are part of, and actually, however small the actions that we take in this chamber, they do have a knock-on effect on a much wider scale. And there are chambers like this all over the world who will be taking those actions. And if they were all thinking on that wider scale when they take those, they understand the weight and import of those decisions for this generation and future generations, then that can only lead to a better place. So I'm very proud to be part of this in a small way. I think the process of getting to where we were was relatively easy for us as councillors, because it really matches with all of the values that we hold, sort of away from the manifestos, but certainly hit on all of our values. And I think it's a really fabulous piece of work, and I'm very proud to be part of it. So,
Thank you, Alex. Chris, do you want to come back and some points from your view?
Yeah, I mean, if I just talk to the specific part about kind of KPIs and how we measure it, I think the approach, which is trying to drive down local KPIs so they're easy to identify for councillors, and also having an ambition to do a wider piece of work identifying how we chip away at things is important. But I think the kind of key thing for us in order to be able to write that report in, say, 3-4 years' time or so, is to do a piece of work quite early on, tessellating the other elements. I think some of the comments at ONS seem to be, because we've developed a framework which is expansive and that's proactive, you know, it is designed to be, you know, the things that people care about, is also, you know, you lay yourself open to criticism where they say, well, why isn't this in it? And why isn't that in it? And in the end, as Peter said, it's a business plan for the council on a limited resources, what we choose to focus on. But the approach about tying things on the SDGs is also to say that they might not be a corporate plan area of new work, so to speak, but they are existing work which we continue to value. And it's about taking our existing strategic documents and looking at them through those lenses. So I think I'd really like to see something kind of early doors, which is an attempt locally shared with councillors about how we're tessellating the existing strategic documents that we already have, you know, our open spaces strategy, the biodiversity stuff, the revised housing strategy, and there will be things which will naturally just also occur within the next, 3-4 years. You know, when we review the homelessness strategy, it'll be a homelessness strategy which you can tie down onto an SDG. So I think that if we can tessellate existing documents which we know are either in place or going to be reviewed, then to the outside world, it will show you're obviously doing the things which you set out in your corporate plan, but you're also living out your values by making sure that those documents, which are already in place, tie in with that. And I think that's kind of key to us writing that final piece of work kind of 3 or 4 years' time, which is actually to say it's part of the bigger picture. This is where we think those bits of work are.
Thanks, Chris. I think that is actually really important, that bit. And I was going to actually say something about, the documents we have through our council, all the policies and everything, are still going to go ahead. But that, I think, is a really good piece of sort of work there to suggest that we actually, slowly but surely, work through those existing policy documents and feed them in. Because, I guess we have to be, it's worth reminding, I think, people now, is listening, that this document is not like a shopping list or a to-do list. This is actually really very much the document that our council officers from top to bottom of the organisation can refer to find their rails that they can go in the right direction in our administration and do work. And that is the real reason for this to be here and a clear document. So when they get the opportunities, when things come up, when we're rewriting a policy or a piece of work on something in particular, we can be fully aware of what our ambitions of this administration are in the corporate plan, and also the direction that we should be going. And, when we all feel comfortable with that, and it's an efficient, effective way of doing work, and I'm very happy with that. So I think it's really good. One thing, I don't know whether there's comments as well, but just thinking the other day, KPIs that we will need to go with this, which will be a piece of work that will follow in a 2 or 3 months' time, won't it? Start to work that through now. I think I'd like to see those go back to overview and scrutiny in a very rough draft form for some comments before we actually put them into practice and just write that through. I think a little bit of committee work on that would be quite helpful. I think we can probably do that, okay, can't we, policy-wise? Not sort of say they write them. I don't think that's the right way of doing it, but it's just to actually just comment about what we've got there and just do that, because I think it was a lot of justifiable angst a little bit in some of the overview and scrutiny committee on that. And also I think we just tended to sort of skip over that bit where the existing policies still sit there and still work their way through. So, Michael.
I'd just like to comment on KPIs. I think these have to be treated with care. I've seen in the private sector that the KPIs become the objective rather than the measure, and they distort behaviour. To set aside the KPIs, and they're only a limited measure, useful, but need to be treated with caution.
Yeah, wise words. Some more comments, anyone? Pep, go.
Thank you. I'm always in awe of people who've got skills that I don't have. This is definitely not in my skill set. So I really want to thank Peter Davis and Alex and Chris and all the others who've worked on this, because when I see a document like this emerge, for me it's a little bit of magic. I've got plenty of skills, but it's not in this arena at all. So one of the things that I was particularly interested in reading the ONS comments, and I suspect that there are people who have similar skill sets or gaps in their skill sets to me, and have demonstrated an anxiety about a lack of concrete action showing in this, and not having appreciated at an earlier stage the purpose and the purpose and function of a corporate plan. I feel much better informed now, and still remain in awe of the work that everyone's put into it. And for me, I'm particularly pleased because not only, I see what, Chris, you've been saying about our existing policies and documents kind of tessellating into this corporate plan, and I think that will help all of us to understand it better, but also the opportunities that it'll present in coming years, because we don't know what, pots of money or direction of travel or, sort of delegated responsibilities might suddenly come our way, and that where we've got that already articulated in our corporate plan, we're going to be, ready on the front foot to take advantage of those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Pip. Anyone else want to say comments at all? Chris, do you want to come back?
I mean, I had a few tweaks, but I think I've sent them to Peter to already suggest that the three of which were essentially worth flagging here is, I think we should reframe the cost of living fund as a support program, because it's not necessarily going to be a pot. It might actually be us funding charities in order to deliver services a little bit broader. I think the stuff on better about property assets, we need to better define. I think when we wrote it, there was one which was about transferring assets into community ownership and one which is about underutilized assets. So we either need to tighten up that language. My personal preference is actually they still stay as two separate items, so to speak. But I think we need to clarify that, because we just refer to property as a general whole, and we obviously know that there are lots of different elements to it. And I think the stuff on cultural events and festivals would be better phrased as cultural events and activities. Otherwise, people will kind of expect festivals in entirely the way that we've historically run them. And I think it's about creating a wider range of different types. And if, Alan, you're going to suggest that we bring something back on KPIs to overview and scrutiny, maybe some of the questions about tessellation and the wider, maybe we could just do a small paper on evaluation of a KPI of the corporate plan, and it can have both this wider kind of qualitative tessellation of existing documents, as well as for quantitative stuff on KPIs. Because I do think there would be an interesting question about traditional KPIs, like we still want to work out and have figures on how regularly it takes us to go and pick up the bins, or how, and those very kind of practical service delivery functions, and some of the wider elements in here. And that might be different types of terms, but I'd concur with Michael's point about not letting us, lead the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's a good point there. I'm actually sort of minded to some of the stuff in the consultation with some organisations, but very interested in heritage and also the sort of, if you like, the greener agenda. And both, of course, are covered by some extensive documentation, the heritage policies and our green, biodiversity and climate change and all that sort of stuff. So they're well and truly covered there. But of course, we just assume that to be the case, that they're going to be dealt with in the proper manner. And officers will know exactly where to go and get that reference for their opportunities that come around. So be good. That's good. Peter, do you want to say, just finger up there, coming in? Yeah,
just on the sort of next stage, once obviously it goes to council and hopefully gets adopted on the 18th. The usual process then is particularly for key policies and strategies, they will then be reviewed in light of what the new sort of focus of the business is, and then new stuff will start coming through. And in some ways, I think Chris may be giving a wink and a nod to stuff that will be coming through in Cabinet on the 8th of July, where already officers are starting to look at the emerging corporate plan and the design. And there's, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at some of the stuff that's coming through from the Whitstable Harbour Board, in particular on our plan, which is starting to reference exactly the way that the corporate plan's written and how you link the SDGs through. So it's probably a spoiler as to, yes, that work's taking place. But it is the normal run-of-mill of things is it will go through, and I know on this in particular, the SDGs don't stop after 4 years, and I'm sure they'll sort of be embedded in some form or another into the way that we operate. So we'll start working those into our longer-term policies and plans as well, including the local plan, which also go back now and fit in the sort of terminology and language that's being used in this rather than the previous draft that's in the current draft of a local plan. So you'll start seeing more of that as policies and strategies come through for either permission to consult or adoption.
That's fantastic. Yeah, so that's really encouraging and fast tracking. That's absolutely amazing. So really good to hear that, and we'll be looking at that. And I think we'll be pulling those out and highlighting those as we go through as well. So that'll be really good. So if there's no more comments, I think on the right bit to read out in a second. Thank you for that, Melissa. Sorry, I buried it under the other piece of paper. So just to sort of quickly summarise where we are. So what we've got this document that's been written, and what we're going to vote on in a moment too is broadly that this document is in very general terms acceptable to go forward to full council. Any amendments to improve things and what we talked about tonight, and obviously one or two other bits and pieces will no doubt come in. They can be taken with my agreement, if you like, to go forward before it goes to council in July. So, but obviously, as Peter hinted, I guess things will be moving in that direction in the preparations going forward anyway, so which is encouraging, and we'll see where we go. So really great piece of work, really pleased with it. I'm very proud that this administration has had the courage to take that decision, and I'm very proud of the work that's been done by the officers to I think make a absolutely fundamental step change in a different direction that this council can get behind. And people elected us to make change. This is a real true example of the changes that we can start to put together. And like all changes in local authority, they don't happen overnight. They seem to happen over the years. But that's just the way it feels, isn't it? It's not a bad thing at all. Taking care. So I'm going to read out what we're going to try to resolve tonight, if you're happy with it. As to recommend that the draft corporate plan 2024 to 28 is adopted, and to resolve so this is your given permission to tonight, tonight. That delegation be given to the leader in consultation with the Director of Strategy and Improvement to make minor changes to the final print version of the draft corporate plan 24 to 28. And that the notice of motion on seawater is recognised as being embedded in the key council strategy and policy throughout through the inclusion of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and specific actions within the draft corporate plan 24 to 28. Okay, so we're resolving the last two and to recommend to full council that they approve the corporate plan. So can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Michael. That's appreciated that. So Michael Dixie to second that proposal. So probably should have done it before we had the debate, but anyway, we've got on with it now.
Yeah.
So
Do you also want to resolve that that paper on evaluation of the corporate plan goes to ONS, or is that separate?
yeah. Just yeah, but just make it happen. I thought yeah, probably that's fine. Yeah, that's okay. It's just a way of putting together that piece of work. We may or may not decide to do it. I think it sounds like a good idea on paper, but it's good to do. Okay, so we need a recorded vote this time, don't we? So if we can go for that, it'd be really good. Thank you very much.
And that's carried unanimously, Chair.
Thank you for that. Okay. That's fine. This always confuses me. We moved the agenda item. I moved my notes around as well. So sorry about that. Okay, this is item 10 now. Let's to look at the working groups, an update there. Again, I think a good piece of work that we can reflect on that's, again, dare I say it, links very much so with the priorities that we bring forward in our corporate plan and the way that we tackle some of those bigger, chunkier items through these working groups. So we can consider that report that Matthew Archer, Head of Corporate Governance, has put together, and Tricia Marshall's here tonight to answer any questions and help us through that report. So I'll hand over to Chris, please, and if you wouldn't mind. Thank you very much.
Yes, as Alan said, this is a report to consider and hopefully establish the working groups for the next council year. If you remember, Cabinet identified 3 working groups, and then the further 3 are identified and agreed by overview and scrutiny. So there are 2 recommendations here, but fundamentally it will be a decision of them at their next meeting. Slightly different from previous years, we'll be starting all of these working groups with a kind of kick-off session with all type of councillors for them to be involved. And it's important to say that whilst these are councillor working groups, we are making a concerted effort to try to engage with members of the public, and there's reference in here in how experts can essentially be invited to multiple sessions. And this isn't the extent of all of our kind of partnership work. In the end, this doesn't include wider kind of partnerships, which we're just part of with various different organisations throughout the rest of the year. So the recommendation is that Cabinet sponsors 3 this year. 1, a continuation on the local plan. I know a lot of people will have thought, what's happening with the consultation? It's all gone quiet. The truth is there's still lots of work to do. There'll still be a lot of consideration, and those final Reg 19s won't be out in the public until probably early next year. So we need to read everything that everyone's got in, consider it, and like the local plan is a jigsaw. If we move one piece somewhere, it'll end up shifting something else. So there's still a lot of work to do, and everybody who's given us their opinions, we need time to consider them. Second is to work something on the visitor economy, which is to pick up some of the notices motion historically we've had on Airbnbs and some of our stuff on Locals for Homes, and about creating a kind of clearer cultural offer for the coast. And the third is essentially on looking at ways in which we can support and develop ideas on a local and circular economy, which will hopefully lead into a wider economic development strategy afterwards. For ONS, we are recommending the continuation of the older persons review, and particularly that I know it's felt like it's kind of rolled over for a while, but essentially it's actually become a wider review of some of our stock and what we use that stock for. It's not just about establishing a need, it's about identifying whether those properties are suitable for our future need. And then something on accessibility and digital inclusion, which is something which the council hasn't considered for some period of time. And obviously people are considered more tech savvy or not tech savvy. There is a increasing chasm, so to speak. So I think that those are good suggestions. So could I recommend that the working groups recommended for cabinet sponsorship be adopted for the year 24-25, and that the suggestions for working group activity for overview and scrutiny committee be put to the committee on the 13th of June for consideration. Thank you.
Seconder for that, please. Thank you, Alex. Does anybody want to add some stuff? I've got Charlotte. Okay, Charlotte, thank you.
Just on the accessibility and digital inclusion working group scope, I wonder if, and this might reflect back to the corporate plan tweaks that could come via Alan, it's not just for those who are not online, but we've also got to consider those with limited digital confidence. And because, of course, it's not just about getting people online and then it's solved, it's getting people online and making sure that it's still then accessible. And I think almost the bigger job is making sure that our platforms and our digital offer is inclusive and accessible and pictorial. And this comes up to me again and again and again as Cabinet Member for Council Services regarding our waste offer and how people access the information and report in, and how a lot of people, particularly older people with limited digital confidence, find some of our online reporting perhaps not as easy as it might be, and that could be reflected in the corporate plan ambition, which then could tie back to this group. So I just wonder if there's a second bullet point there to improve council services for those not online, to audit council services for those who are online but with limited digital confidence, or something along those lines. Thank you.
Sounds pretty reasonable. Yeah, so in other words, it's sort of those, just not getting people online, but how people use it as well. So really, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly that. There's limited value if you're just getting people online and then they're flummoxed by a website or a corporate front that's too complicated for them to access and understand. So.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, go ahead.
I would just use the word user-friendly to sum exactly what you're talking about.
That way and see where that goes. And reasonable. Alex?
Yeah, just follow up. I think that's a really good point, actually, because I think there's an assumption that digital services are excluding older people in particular, but there's a huge number of people who, have smartphones, may have access to our services, but don't have the confidence to use them, don't have the knowledge to use them. And I think, even those of us who use computers through our daily work can find ourselves a bit daunted by a form or two from time to time. So I think it's worth looking at. I think in general, I think this is a really good and hard fought set of working groups. I think one of the things that the stark realities from coming in last May was how all of the things that we want to look at, all of the things we could have a working group for, it is limited simply by the resource, mostly in terms of the number of officers that are there to support them, but also in terms of the number of councillors, and as Chris pointed out, with bringing outside knowledge and expertise into these groups so that they can actually be useful and provide some really strong feedback. I'm delighted to see the continuation of the local plan working group. I think that's something that I've heard strongly from people, that they want to make sure that the consultation responses are considered really thoroughly. I know the work that the local plan working group did in the lead up to putting the last draft out was pretty strenuous, and to continue that commitment going through all of the responses and perhaps looking at what the Regulation 19 offer will look like, I think is really, really important. And again, the visitor economy working group, something very close to my heart as well. So I think this is a really nice and well worked set of working groups. I think we've managed to cover a lot of the areas that we've really wanted to look at in the first year. There obviously will be more going forward, but I think, you know, given the resources we have, I think this covers everything really, really well.
Charlotte.
Sorry, I'm coming back again on the accessibility and digital inclusion one, just because it is going back to ONS. So I think they're the ones that particularly I'm minded to get right. Accessibility should also include accessibility to being democratically accessible, I think, and that the scope of that particular working group could also look at how democratically accessible we are. What information do we have online? How difficult is it to find about what we do and how we make decisions? I'm not saying it's not there, it is there, but just making sure that the working group might make some interesting recommendations for even more information about ourselves and our processes that could be available. Thank you.
Yeah, I think as always, the put together, isn't it, by the actual working group in the beginning, but those ideas are. Tricia, do you want to come back on them?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think because the report is going to go to ONS, Peter's going to ONS, so he will make sure that those comments are fed back to that committee as part of the introduction to the report from officers. Thank you.
Yeah, that's ideal, and then that gives View and Scrutiny the chance to shape their own working groups, doesn't it, with our thoughts in mind. Pip.
Yes, thank you. On the accessibility and digital inclusion one, and I know it's an ONS one, but there's the issue of how people are able to get in touch with us, and I think that's not just about digital inclusion, it's about phone numbers and face-to-face. That's something that still comes up, and I know it's a diminishing market, but it remains a really important one that we make provision for. And it's also about the quality of the interaction once people get through to us. And again, I know as a ward councillor that's frequently an issue, and particularly looking at the housing issues to do with housing. It's about whether people find it easy to communicate or not, and also then the quality of the communication. Once they're able to get through. So if Peter, you could kindly take those comments back to ONS. I know it's their working group. And the only other comment I'd like to make is also about the other ONS working group, because I chair the Older Persons Accommodation Review, and clearly, we're getting to the sharp end of our deliberations now, and where we're looking at the possibility of making sure that we have fit for purpose, accommodation for older people going forward, the right type, the right number, and that we would aspire to provide our residents with. That there may well be the need to repurpose, or the opportunity to repurpose for other groups. And that has already been mentioned in the corporate plan ambitions to reduce the use of temporary accommodation out of area. But I wouldn't want that working group to stray beyond that element in relation to the existing accommodation. And it may well be that in a future year, you'll find me coming back advocating for a separate working group on the whole, strategy and issue of temporary accommodation and our homelessness strategy. Thank you. Just an early marker.
Taken. Thank you. That's good. If that's it, so I think we're happy with the conversation there. Just get my act together. So we've got this proposed and seconded now, and we can go to a recorded vote. So that would be to resolve those two items there. Thank you.
And that's carried unanimously, Chair.
Okay, well, it's the end of the evening now. We've got the way through our agenda. So the date of the next meeting will be 7 p.m. on the 8th of July. There's no other urgent business to be dealt with in public. I don't think there is. So it's fine. And there's no need to exclude the press and public. So with that, we can close the meeting at 20:04. Thank you very much.